Okay, this video is to help you basically better manage your estrogen when on TRT or steroids. And I'm not going to cover I'm not going to plug every hole. I found that when I make videos, I try to plug every single hole and it just I go down rabbit holes and I don't cover the things I want to in a concise enough way. So I'll be very simple. First, if you want to talk to your doctor about changing a protocol, you can, or talk to your doctor about approaching your estrogen management differently, you can. So the advice that I give you here isn't just go do it. It's me saying, go talk to your doctor about changing this aspect of your protocol, or talk to your doctor about your steroid cycle, because you should be doing that anyway to keep an eye on health markers and making sure you're not fucking up your heart or whatever. So here's my experience. And when I talk about aromatase inhibitors, I'm specifically talking about Arimidex because that's the only AI that I have experience with. So I'm not going to bullshit you and talk about things that I don't have experience or knowledge about. So in my experience, I've had a lot of experience with extremely high estrogen and extremely low estrogen and pretty much everywhere in between. So when you look around for people's opinion on high and low estrogen symptoms, a lot of them say they're basically identical, or there's only a few discrepancies between the two. They're very hard to distinguish. In my experience, they're actually fairly easy to distinguish. It does take a little bit of time to figure it out, and if you've had experience with both high and low, that can help you out, and just having that personal experience can help you distinguish between the two. But I think the list of symptoms that I'm going to give you will help you out dramatically in determining what issue you have. So remember, your symptoms are going to be on a gradient, just like estradiol can be on a gradient. You can have very, very low crashed estrogen, moderately low, low, normal, moderately high, very high, extremely high. So, when people say my high estrogen symptoms versus my low estrogen symptoms, are you talking about crashed versus out of this world high, or is it just moderately? The symptoms are going to vary in that way. So let's just talk about the moderates first. So when I have moderately high estrogen, I basically turn into a bitch. That's how I describe it. So I don't get along well with other people. I don't like hanging out with other people. I snap very, very easily. That's kind of one of my go-to signs, is if I kind of lash out at somebody where I otherwise wouldn't have. That makes me kind of raise an eyebrow and wonder if there's something going on. I also notice when my estrogen is moderately high, I start getting baggy eyes, a little bit of water retention, I would assume. I never have really any issues with acne with high estrogen for some reason. Don't know why. Most people complain about a lot of acne with high estrogen. With moderately low estrogen, I feel relatively flat, emotionally flat. I like to be a bit of a recluse. I don't find as much pleasure in things as I should. And I also notice that even with moderately low estrogen, my workouts suffer. So when my estrogen is moderately high, my workouts are really good. My joints are lubricated. I get a good pump. When it's moderately low, I feel flat and I can't get a good pump, and I just can't really work out for as long or enjoy it as much. So you'll notice even more when I go to the extremes here that in my experience, high estrogen is like a high energy state. There's a lot of anxiety. You're wide awake. It's there's a lot going on in your head. And with low estrogen, it's a low energy state where you're emotionless. You're tired, you don't want to be with anybody, you don't really find joy in anything. So I would relate high estrogen with anxiety, and I would relate low estrogen with depressed states. So when you get to the extremely high estrogen, in my experience, the most noticeable thing is extreme anxiety. I get panic attacks with high estrogen. I'll be gripping the kitchen counter going take a deep breath, buddy, it's going to be okay. It's so extremely noticeable, it's impossible to miss. So for me, panic attack anxiety and greasy skin is by far the biggest symptom of high estrogen. And extremely low estrogen, it feels like all the joy and color of life has been sucked away. So you'll notice anxiety with high, and then depression with low. So this is why I feel that it's easy, or relatively easy, for me to distinguish between the two, because I can just tell the difference between a higher energy state and a lower energy state. And I know that sounds like hippie bullshit. I'm not talking about vibrations or anything. I'm just talking about your brain is really, really active and anxious when you got high estrogen, and it's really flat and lulled and low when you have low estrogen. So why do you need to know these symptoms anyway? Here's why. Although you should get blood work when you're having problems, it takes time for that blood work to get back to you. So you'll have like, oh, I'm having like a panic attack. I'm going to go get my blood work done. It's going to take like 3 days to a week for your blood work to get back to you. And what do you do until then? You just like ride it out. Sometimes you have to make your best guess. This can be especially true if you're on a steroid cycle and starting like Arimidex from the get-go, or you started having high estrogen symptoms and you're starting Arimidex early on. As your testosterone levels increase in your blood, so will your estradiol levels, and you'll have to constantly be like adapting to higher and higher estrogen. Sometimes the same dose can work throughout, your entire cycle or whatever, but sometimes you're going to have to like gradually increase as time goes on. There is a range for most people where they're going to feel good. It's not like a specific number where my estrogen has to be 49 picograms per milliliter for me to feel okay, and any higher or lower and I'm going to be fucked. That's just not how it works. So luckily there's a range. So some people can get away with dosing like 0.25 every other day for the entire cycle from like week 2 or whatever, and they'll be fine. Here's my rule of thumb to go by. That's the 2-week method. I coin it the 2-week method. Why 2 weeks? Good question. Arimidex has a half-life of about 3 days. It takes about 5 to 6 half-lives to reach peak concentration, and this will vary based on an individual's metabolism, but this is a general rule of thumb. So 5.5 times 3 is going to be 15, so that's 15 days, about 2 weeks until Arimidex reaches peak concentration. Now, excluding having to balance the ever-rising estradiol if you haven't reached peak concentration of testosterone yet, 2 weeks is a good benchmark. Like, I've made it. Like, if you're dosing Arimidex for 2 weeks, at regular intervals, and at the 2-week mark you're feeling pretty good, it's still time to go get blood work, but you're pretty much in the clear because you're at like steady state estradiol, and you really won't have to worry about adjusting your Arimidex dosage from there on out. So I've made the mistake in the past. I keep a journal of the medication that I took in a day, how I felt, my blood pressure, all sorts of information. And I've made the mistake in the past where I've gone by 1 week chunks. Like, I'm like, wow, okay, I took a milligram of Arimidex in the past week. I'm going to base how I'm feeling now based off of last week's amount of AI. And that's the incorrect way to do it. And I've screwed myself over quite recently doing it that way. So what you need to do is look at how you're feeling now, go back through your records, which you should be keeping them, especially on steroid cycle. Go back through your records for 2 weeks, okay? Look at how much you've taken on average across those 2 weeks and relate it to how you feel. And that'll give you a good picture of like, okay, this dose of Arimidex is causing me to feel this way. So I found that that's the best way to manage Arimidex dosing is in 2 week blocks. If you do it any other way, it really just doesn't make any sense to me, really. You want to try to give yourself the best estimate of what dose is making you feel what way and what dose is giving you this result in your blood work. So you should be keeping a log and doing it in 2 week chunks. As far as like TRT, there are a lot of ways you can lower your estradiol without having to introduce an AI. And I've made a video on that, so I'll throw it up in the corner. But an AI, in my opinion, on TRT should be a last resort. If you're doing a steroid cycle, you're kind of already all in anyway. And you're dosing it so high anyway, it wouldn't really make sense to like inject, split your steroid cycle into daily injections. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Getting blood work for estrogen is really, really cheap. You can go through ultawellness.com, I think. I'm not affiliated. And you can get estradiol checked for like less than $40. So if I can get it, if I'm having issues or like I feel like I'm kind of on the verge, I'll just go get my blood checked. Or it's just so easy. I don't know why you wouldn't do it. Because there have been times where it's like, I feel like maybe my estrogen's kind of high, but I'll know in a few days for sure. And then a few days passes and I'm like, I still actually don't know. Like, I don't feel well, but I don't know if my estrogen's high or what. So I had wished that I had gotten my blood drawn back then so I could have a number to look back at, but I don't. So if you're having any suspicions that you're having problems, go get blood work, and you may have to adjust on the fly in the meantime. Once you get that blood work back, you look at your journal, look at the past 2 weeks before you got your blood work done, see how much you've dosed for Arimidex, or, the same rule applies to any other AI where it's 5 to 6 half-lives equals steady state. So you multiply 5.5 by the half-life of your aromatase inhibitor, and you've got that block that you need to look at. For Arimidex, it's 2 weeks. For other AIs, I'm not sure. You have to do the simple math to figure that out. But you get your blood work back, and you look at the 2-week period before you got your blood drawn, and then you can see how much, Arimidex you've taken, or how much of an AI you've taken, and you can adjust from there based on your blood work and your symptoms. Now, I was watching a video of Greg Doucette a while ago. I saw recently, I think he took it down. Might have been for liability issues. But he was saying that, not to take his suggestion, but if you're doing a 500 milligram per week steroid cycle of testosterone, cypionate, or enanthate, he would personally take a milligram of Arimidex every other day. And I was like, holy shit, that's insane. To me, that's a lot. I would start with the lowest dose you possibly can, 0.25 twice a week. Even for some people on TRT, like 0.25 twice a week will bring their estrogen too low. I personally know somebody where that was the case. Their total T is like at 1,000. I don't know where their free T is, but 0.25 of Arimidex twice per week is enough to push their estrogen so low that they feel like really bad. So, you have to start fucking using a pill cutter to split the 0.25 into 0.125 and take that twice a week and see if that works. So it's smart to dose as low as possible first and increase that dose as needed or as blood work, shows. So if your blood work shows high estrogen, but you feel great, you don't need, talk to your doctor, but in my opinion, why would you want to change anything? I see people talking all the time, like, I feel great, like my sex drive's amazing, but my estradiol is like 59. Like, should I start taking Arimidex? It doesn't make any sense to me. You're adding another drug when you don't have any problems. Like, you're reacting based off of a number on paper. I personally don't do that. My estrogen on like 140 milligrams of testosterone cypionate is like 49 picograms per milliliter, and I feel pretty good. Probably not like perfect, but not enough to warrant taking an AI. So I don't take one. I don't see the need to, knock my estrogen down another 15 or so by introducing another drug. I don't really care to do that. So if you feel great, who cares what your estrogen looks like on paper? I know Ron from Muscle and Development Magazine was doing a podcast with Dr. Thomas O'Connor, the anabolic doc, and he was talking about how he usually cruises on 400 milligrams of testosterone, which is definitely not TRT levels typically. And he was concerned because he recently had his estrogen checked, and his estradiol was 200 picograms per milliliter, which seems out of this world crazy for people. And for a lot of people, that would be causing problems. But for him, he feels great. So he was going to start taking an aromatase inhibitor, but it was like they decided together that probably didn't make a whole lot of sense because he wasn't having any negative symptoms. He felt, relatively fantastic. So what's the need to put another drug in your body that has side effects when you don't have any symptoms, even if the number is high on paper? So anyway, just something to think about. Hope that helps. Check you later. Bye.